These are 10 cards you should always draft in Bloomburrow. Now, always a bit of a strong word, so we'll just say these are commons and uncommons that have been very impressive to me, and so you should always at least consider them when you see them in packs, because I think you should be prioritizing them higher because they are quite good. We'll be kicking things off with Bright Blade Stoat. This card does everything you want to do in a white deck in this format. Bloomburrow can be very quick, which means being on the front foot and aggressive is often what you're trying to do, especially when you're drafting white. The problem is that sometimes you're going to lose the die roll and your opponent is going to get off to a fast start, and Bright Blade Stoat is the exact sort of card that can let you turn around the tide and start getting on the front foot again. If your opponent plays a 2-drop and is planning on attacking you, Bright Blade Stoat can be an absolute brick wall, because even if they attack you and you decide not to block in fear of a combat trick or something like that, you can just turn around, attack them, and all of a sudden you're on the front foot, you're attacking them, your Bright Blade Stoat is getting in for damage and keeping your life total high, which is just what you want. Oftentimes it can just stop their attacks entirely, and overall it might have a very simple text box, but it's just what you're looking for, and as a card you should be taking highly. Next is Hunter's Talent, a very nice card because it's a removal spell in almost all cases. You're often going to be able to have a creature in play, and then it can also just take over the mid game and win you the game almost single-handedly by buffing up your creatures and drawing you extra cards, which is just so much power to be contained in a card that at its floor is very often a removal spell. Now, the true floor is you don't have a creature in play and it does nothing, but oftentimes the general floor of the card is killing something, and then you can just win the game with it on the high end, which is just absolutely fantastic and definitely a card that is worth prioritizing. Next is Quake-Tusk Boar, a card that is just absolutely devastating at the top end of a curve. It's the card you're crossing your fingers and hoping your opponent doesn't have, because when they come in and play this card on turn 5, it's just going to do so much damage. Even if you deal with it the following turn, the 5 damage can oftentimes just decide the game. Trample means it's really hard to deal with. Haste means it comes down like a ball of fury. And Reach is also sometimes very useful in the games where the board is a bit stalled and you're trying to chip in with flyers. So overall, a fantastic card, and one that every red deck is going to be happy to have at the top end of its curve. Next is Carrot Cake, a common that's really easy to overlook because on its front end when you first play it, you don't get necessarily all that much. One creature and a scry 1. But in the mid game when scries become very valuable because you don't need lands anymore, all of a sudden Carrot Cake gets a lot of advantage because you're able to scry those lands away, set up your draws, get some tokens, and even gain some life to help you stabilize, which is just really, really nice. If you have token synergies, this is just the card you're looking for, and it's a card that it's easy to gloss over when you're first reading it, but definitely one that you should keep an eye on in the draft and definitely take a little higher than you are. Next is Galewind Moose, a really nice top-end card for any green deck. When you flash this in and kill one of your opponent's creatures in combat by blocking it out of nowhere, it feels almost like the game cannot be, you almost feels like you can't lose pretty much. You get to then start attacking your opponent with Vigilance, which means your opponent can't really attack you back because not many creatures can brawl with a 6/6 creature, and the fact that it has Trample means that if your opponent does go for a double block, you can blow them out with combat tricks and things like that and still trample over to win the game or things like that. So an absolutely terrifying card that basically demands removal, and even when it does get killed, a lot of the time you've gotten some value by flashing it in, and overall just a card you should definitely be taking very highly. Next is Thoughtstalker Warlock, a really nice card that has a very high floor and also a very high ceiling, which just makes it excellent. The floor is 3 mana 2/2 Menace that makes them discard a card, which is just really a nice card on its own. But the fact that when you've dealt damage to your opponent or they've lost life, you get to just take a card of your choice pretty much. That's a non-land, of course, but still very, very nice to set up your rest of your curve, take their answer cards, take their best threat, really just do whatever you want. And this card is excellent as a result and definitely one to prioritize. Next is Head of the Homestead, a card I wanted to discuss here because it's really nice to have in the drafting portion, because a lot of the time these multicolored cards are only good in that one specific deck, but Head of the Homestead, with its cost, with what it brings to the battlefield, just an army in a can type card, means that it's great in any green deck or any white deck pretty much. So even though it might look like, oh, you only want this in green-white specifically, it's actually a green or white card instead of green and white card, which means when you take this card in the draft, if your deck is just a green deck, you can play it. If your deck is just a white card, you can play it because of the hybrid mana. That flexibility is really nice. You can build some synergies with the card, and of course, it's absolutely stellar in the green-white deck. But because of the flexibility, it's a really nice card to prioritize in the draft because you know that you'll be having a high likelihood of getting to put it into your final build. Next is Playful Shove, a card that just does everything for very cheap, and it has a very high floor once again. Just 2 mana, deal 1 damage to something, and draw a card means that it's never going to be like a dead card. You can always get rid of it and replace it if it is going to be bad. But just some of the things it does well. If your opponent has a 1 toughness creature, you just get to kill that. Sometimes that can just be game winning. Like if they tap out for like a 4 mana 3/1 flyer or something like that, you kill that for 2 mana, the game is basically just like you've taken such a huge advantage. You can also use this to trigger your cards that care about casting non-creature spells, so trigger your prowess effects and replace itself to keep digging through your deck. You can also use this to help you when you're trying to get expend 4. You can play this, maybe draw into something else to get to that expend. It fills your graveyard really easily for foraging. It just goes to your graveyard after you cast it, maybe get a little bit of value. You can also cast it targeting your own creatures sometimes to trigger Valiant. It really just does everything in every single deck. If you care about making your opponent lose life, but you don't have good attacks, you can ping them. It's just a fantastic card and one you should be taking because every single red deck wants this card. And the ceiling of killing one of your opponent's 1 toughness creatures is just absolutely phenomenal, and it's always going to do something for you. Next is Bushy Bodyguard, a card that might look like just a squirrel's card because it is itself a squirrel, but it's just such a monstrous amount of stats for 2 mana and 4 mana that it's a card you're going to want in all of your green decks. 2 mana 4/3 is really good even in the mid game because it lets you double spell and do stuff like that, but if you just fill your graveyard or have some food lying around, you just cast this for 4 mana, get a 4/3 and a 3/3 for just 4 mana. It's just going to take over the game, and it's definitely a card to be prioritizing in all of your green decks. And then the final card I wanted to talk about is Intrepid Rabbit. It's a really strong common. Don't let 3 mana 3/2 of stats fool you. The ability to offspring and get an extra 1/1 is absolutely huge here. You're often going to want to cast it for that 4 mana ability. It shines in red-white where you can target your Valiant creatures, and also in green-white where you're getting 2 bodies, a couple of triggers to maybe push some damage the turn it comes into play as well, and overall just really synergizing nicely there. In black, white, and blue, white, it's still solid, but oftentimes your white decks are going to want to lean towards green or red, and so it's really at its best in the decks where it matters most. Really a nice card that you're happy to play pretty much any number of copies that you can get, and don't be fooled by just 3 mana 3/2 when you just first read the card. It really plays out extremely well and is a terrifying card to face when your opponent is curving out on you and just plays this on turn 4 and just enables a huge attack and has a little bit of an army built up. Anyway, that's going to do it for this video. Hopefully you found some cards that maybe you hadn't been prioritizing as highly. If you made it to the end, leave hashtag 10wins in the comments section down below because these cards are winners that you're going to be happy to play. I do hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you thought in the comment section down below. Remember to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe for more, and comment with your questions, thoughts, and feedback. That's going to do it for this one though. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time.